Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Nggak ada vitamin C seenak ini. Pilih Sido Muncul vitamin C 1000. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu?
Langsung dihap bisa, sup sampai kimbab juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak sampai makan-makan, Mama selalu tahu yang enak.
Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Nggak ada vitamin C seenak ini. Pilih Sido Muncul vitamin C 1000. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu?
Langsung dihap bisa, sup sampai kimbab juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak sampai makan-makan, Mama selalu tahu yang enak.
Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Nggak ada vitamin C seenak ini. Pilih Sido Muncul vitamin C 1000. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh. fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu.
Langsung di hub bisa, sup sampai kimbab juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak sampai makan-makan, Mama selalu tahu yang enak.
Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Nggak ada vitamin C seenak ini. Pilih Sido Muncul vitamin C 1000. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu.
Langsung di hub bisa, sup sampai kimbab juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak sampai makan-makan, Mama selalu tahu yang enak.
Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Nggak ada vitamin C seenak ini. Pilih Sido Muncul vitamin C 1000. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu.
Langsung di hub bisa, sup sampai kimbab juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak sampai makan-makan, Mama selalu tahu yang enak.
Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Nggak ada vitamin C seenak ini. Pilih Sido Muncul vitamin C 1000. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu.
Langsung di hub bisa, sup sampai kimbab juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak sampai makan-makan, Mama selalu tahu yang enak.
Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Nggak ada vitamin C seenak ini. Pilih Sido Muncul vitamin C 1000. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu.
Langsung di hub bisa, sup sampai kimbab juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak sampai makan-makan, Mama selalu tahu yang enak.
Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Nggak ada vitamin C seenak ini. Pilih Sido Muncul vitamin C 1000. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu?
Langsung di hub bisa, sup sampai kimbab juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak sampai makan-makan, Mama selalu tahu yang enak.
Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Nggak ada vitamin C seenak ini. Pilih Sido Muncul vitamin C 1000. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu?
Langsung di hub bisa, sup sampai kimbab juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak sampai makan-makan, Mama selalu tahu yang enak.
Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Nggak ada vitamin C seenak ini. Pilih Sido Muncul vitamin C 1000. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu?
Langsung dihap bisa, sup sampai kimbab juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak sampai makan-makan, Mama selalu tahu yang enak.
Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Nggak ada vitamin C seenak ini. Pilih Sido Muncul vitamin C 1000. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu.
Langsung dihap bisa, sup sampai kimbab juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak sampai makan-makan, Mama selalu tahu yang enak.
Trubus Bina Swadaya.
Nggak ada vitamin C seenak ini. Pilih Sido Muncul vitamin C 1000. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu.
Langsung dihap bisa, sup sampai kimbab juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak
Okay, case building time is up. Everyone, pens up. Okay. So, without further ado, let's start today's debate. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Putu, and I will be your chairperson in this debate. The motion of the debate today is this House welcomes cultural appropriation. Today, we have Canisius as team government and UPH College as team opposition. In team government, we have the Prime Minister, which is Macario, Deputy Prime Minister, which is Arvin, the government whip, which is Marco, and Arvin as the government reply. In team opposition, we have Teresia as the leader of opposition, Rachel as the deputy leader of opposition, Ken as the opposition whip, and Teresia as the opposition reply. Now, to open this case, I invite Macario as the Prime Minister. The stage is yours.
My internet isn't doing so well. Can I just turn on can I just turn off my camera? Like, so it won't
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Give me a second. Ladies and gentlemen, the honorable judges, as well as fellow debaters, at the current moment of status quo, cultural appropriation is something that is deemed in a bad light. It is something that is seen by many people, or the majority, that is looked down upon, and something that is seen as a negative thing. But our side also believe that this cultural appropriation is a bad thing, and in fact, we'll explain to you why it actually brings more good, or it actually brings good instead of harm. So, first, I will give you our definition of what cultural appropriation is. So, we define culture appropriation as something. We define culture. We define culture appropriation by something where a majority of people appropriates a certain culture that is not the majority, or it is a minority, or something that's not well known. So, and how do we define welcome? So, we will welcome cultural appropriation by embracing it, by supporting people doing it, and giving support to those who do it at cultural appropriation. So, why is this important? First, I will give you a characterization of the people who will be impacted by this. The first people are the open-minded people, or the progressives, and the people who already know about other culture, which means these are the people where they are open to new ideas, the people who are open to new things, and the people who are pretty progressive and will not be shocked when they see a new culture entering their life. And second, ladies and gentlemen, are the conservative people, conservative group. These are the people who are not privileged enough to know other cultures, the people who don't have the money to go to other countries, or the people who don't have many minorities living in their area, so that they are not so used to other culture. So, and these second group of people, are the people we have to change their mind, because these group of people are the people who causes the most damage to this minority. So next, who are the vulnerable actors here? The vulnerable actors, obviously, the cultural minority, or the people who are part of the cultural minority that lives in a certain place. Next achievement is the urgency. The urgency here is that right now, the act of culturally appropriating other cultures is being attacked constantly, and is looked down on negative light. It is looked down on negative light, and because of a reasoning, or because of a thought that because they might think, or they're afraid that this cultural appropriation might instead attack or harm the minority group. But this is the case, because if anything, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why racism and the reason why cultural attack happens is not because those cultures are being appropriated, but it's because the people who are conservative, the people who are not aware of the culture, do not know this culture. So because of the people not knowing of the new culture, they instead react aggressively. They instead react in a bad manner. So then I will continue my argument. My first argument will be is that cultural appropriation will make people, especially the conservative group, the people who are not aware of the culture, the people who don't have the privilege to see other countries, or the people who don't have any minorities living in a place, to accept that culture better and lessen their racism against that certain culture. Ladies and gentlemen, we must acknowledge that the reason people do racism, or the people why there are racist people in the first place, is because those people aren't aware, or those people aren't open, or they haven't touched or received or know certain other culture, especially Malay culture. And usually these people aren't privileged enough to have the money or ability to see other cultures. So what they are used to, or what they do know, are the cultures that they are, or the cultures that they have. Example, the cultures like the people that people living in the Rust Belt, they might not know the Asian culture and they only know their culture, such as Thanksgiving and so on and so forth. So if we do culture appropriation, which means where the majority will then modify the cultural identity of the minority, they will see that this is not such an extreme thing, that this conservative group will see that the minority, or the cultural minority that they've been opposing, isn't actually a bad thing, because this will soften them up. By having a not so radical or not so direct approach of introducing new culture to these people, and instead using cultural appropriation, that it will convince them, or it will make them accept the culture better. Because some people are just shocked, and some people can be expected to accept every culture in the first place, just because that is something that you are already used to, ladies and gentlemen. Which is an important thing, because as I've said before, these conservative groups, or these conservative people, are the people who attack, or are the people who do discrimination against this cultural minority, which is why we have to convince this is the most important group we have to convince, so that the most vulnerable actor won't be attacked. So, and then I will continue to my second argument, ladies and gentlemen. My second argument would be that cultural appropriation is a gatekeeping technique that keep a certain culture not exposed to the majority or most of the people. Ladies and gentlemen, not everyone has the knowledge and the privilege to learn every aspect of a certain culture. Most people don't know, or most people do know of a certain culture, but not to its extent. So just because some people didn't copy or do the exact or the right ritual or the right way of wearing a dress, this doesn't mean these people are trying to degrade, or these people are trying to make a bad image of this culture. If anything, these people has a good intention. Their intention is to help spread this minority culture. But because there is a sort of, or a thought of idea, or sort of cloud in many people, where they think just because these people are so-called culturally appropriating the culture, they think that they are trying to harm minority. But if anything, if we let cultural appropriation grow, then we will be able to see more culture being take place, because then not only the people who are part of the culture are able to spread the message, but also other people who are not part of the culture, so that the majority, ladies and gentlemen, can also help spread the culture of the minority, so that then it will spread other culture, and then again, as I've said, ladies and gentlemen, will help stop or help introduce people to new culture, so that the negative stigma against them can be lessened. And the third argument would be that there is no actual harm to culture appropriation. Just because it isn't perfect, just because the person doing it isn't doing it in the perfect stance, doesn't mean it brings harm. Because the people, as I've said before, the conservative group will not see this in a bad light. If anything, they will see it in a better light. They will see it as they will see it that this new culture is something they are more familiar with. This culture that it is brought on to people they trust, to people who aren't that foreign. Which, well, ladies and gentlemen, we are proud to propose and would like to welcome cultural appropriation. Thank you.
Thank you, Macario, who spoke for 7 minutes and 12 seconds. Now, I invite the leader of opposition, Teresia. The stage is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, before getting on to my argument, I have two rebuttals to say about what the first speaker of the government side of the House has to say. Now, first of all, he mentioned how cultural appropriation can lower down racism. Now, but our side of the House believes that this does not lower down racism, because in the end of the day, this cultural appropriation can actually create it can actually create the rise of stereotypes, and this itself is harmful, and which I will later on elaborate in my arguments. Secondly, he mentioned that cultural appropriation can help spread or embrace a certain culture. But our side of the house believes that if the context is not accurate, it will be wrong, even though if the person, let's say, accidentally did it without having the intention to mock a certain culture. But how can we assure that this incident is not accidental and that is not someone's intention? Because logically, what we know is that we can never know a certain person's intentions. Now, based also on the context slide, talks about how cultural appropriation in this debate is talking about how it is used unacknowledgedly and inappropriately. So that is why their argument in giving the point that cultural appropriation is used to help spread and embrace a certain culture is not valid. Now, before getting onto my arguments again, I would like to define the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. Cultural appropriation is adopting a certain factor or element of another culture. For example, like said in the context slide, customs, practice, and ideas. While appreciation is the act of learning and acquiring knowledge about a certain culture for the sake of knowledge. And there's a difference between cultural appropriation and appreciation. For example, cultural appreciation, wearing someone's. For example, if you are going to Hawaii, you will as a tradition there, they will give outsiders this thing called oleh, which is also known as a flower necklace. Now, how you show appreciation to them is by wearing this, and that is not appropriation, because that is appreciation because it has been given by the tribe as a symbol of culture and welcome, right? And I would also like to talk about what is offensive and what is exploitation. Offensive is not always harming other culture, but or if you already make someone from a certain culture uncomfortable in the first place, that is already considered offensive, because you're already stepping in their line of comfort and you are already in a way invading their culture. Now, exploitation is using a certain culture in the wrong context and not serving its purpose. For example, in Chinese and in Buddhist, they have this things called shrines. And for example, if let's say a white interior designer decides to create something like this shrine, create a shrine for inside of a house for aesthetic purpose, that itself is exploitation, because it is taking away the sacred meaning of a certain thing and using it in the wrong context. Now, the status quo that I want to talk about is that a lot of people coming from a dominant race has been adapting these cultures and customs in the wrong context for either social media attraction or also aesthetics, right? And the urgency for us to not welcome cultural appropriation is because there can be the rise of stereotypes, and and also right now, a lot of people are unaware that their actions of using someone else's culture or implementing customs of others' culture is actually offending a certain race group, especially minority race. Now, our goal from our side of the house is to promote cultural appreciation instead of adopting a culture blindly. And this doesn't have to be done by implementing and wearing whatever they do, doing the rituals that they do, because in the end of the day, it doesn't belong to us. Now, I would like to talk about how my first argument being how the influence of cultural appropriation in the wrong context. Now, there's this thing called white supremacy, okay? A lot of dominant race have a wider influence, which means that they can easily influence their race or maybe other races too. And because they have a very big influence on others, others will think that they can easily adapt. They can easily adopt a culture or custom with ease. They can, for example, they will make other white communities think that, oh, it's okay for me to wear a Indian pashmina and put a red dot on my head for let's say for a Hindu festival, just because it's for fun, and just because it's showing it's showing appreciation. But our side of the house believe that this is not appreciation, since it is used in the wrong context and only used to for someone's personal favors, and also for maybe social media attraction and aesthetics. Now, this influence that, as I said before, how dominant race can influence other races to follow them, and to make other race think that they can adopt any culture with ease without having to think over and over again, can also um, make the rise of stereotypes, which brings me on to my next argument. Now, the influence of a certain culture in the wrong context, whether it's intentional or not, will make others believe that this group of minority will always look like how it is being portrayed by the appropriators, by those who commits cultural appropriation. Now, other groups, other cultures will think that, oh, all Arabs have to wear headscarf, all Indians have to wear pashmina, all all Sikhs have to wear turban. But that is not true, because because of this, because of the influence of the dominant race towards other race, this can rise the stereotypes of soul. And thirdly, I want to talk about how you can actually show genuine appropriation through the interest of learning and building social and empathy towards those minority groups around you. Of course, wherever you live, you will always find minority groups, whether it's in social media or whatsoever. If you say you don't have money, you can still approach them on social media, learn from them, and it doesn't mean that you have to implement their culture and wear what they wear, do their ritual, because in the end of the day, it's their history, and they get this history long years before you do, and they have a backstory behind how they earn this certain culture, how they have this certain custom. It is their history dating back to hundreds of years ago, and that is why you should never use it in the wrong context, intentionally or unintentionally. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresia, who spoke for 7 minutes and 40 seconds. Now, to expand the case, I invite Arvin as the Deputy Prime Minister of the government team. Ready whenever you are.
Okay, I'm not gonna use my camera because it's a bit laggy sometimes, and I can't really see the timer. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, to expand the case upon the government side of the house, I would first like to give out 3 points of rebuttals before delving into my arguments or argument extensions from my first speaker. First of all, the opposition side of the house has made a very bold claim and a very prominent claim about stereotypes and racism, when they have failed to acknowledge or even realize that stereotypes only happen, stereotypes are only made because people think that a certain trait is exclusive to a certain culture. To explain more about this, I would like to give an elaboration. Basically, if a certain trait is known to be exclusive to a certain group of people, and that causes stereotypes, because then it is only bound to a certain group of people. That's why people immediately get the stereotype that, oh, all Jamaicans wear dreadlocks, because then if anyone tries to wear that type of hairstyle outside of their own group, even if they did it for respectful reasons because they really like the culture, they would be accused of cultural appropriation and they would receive backlash. So the opposition side of the house isn't really solving their own case of stereotypes. In fact, they're only promoting it by gatekeeping culture itself. Also, we would like to give a comparison because of what is better for an actor that the opposition side of the house has failed to discuss. Conservative groups, the people who usually have stigmas against the cultural minority, and the people who have a negative stigma of a culture that they are not aware of, or to not care for culture because it's cultural appropriation or appreciation, is too radical and foreign to them. To use cultural appropriation, the things that they are more used to, can be used in order to warm them up to the idea of a certain culture. Your solution will only work for the people who are already used to new cultures or the progressives, while and you will not exactly spread more awareness about a certain culture and the meaning behind the culture if you're not even going to try and explain it and gatekeep your own culture, isolating it. And the opposition side of the House has brought up time and time again about cultural appreciation. Well, let me just tell you this. They have not explained a way of differentiating cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation, especially in the age of political correctness, because there is no way of differentiating cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. Their side of the house has promoted this idea of cultural appreciation before realizing that people use the cultural appropriation excuse without knowing if someone actually likes or respects the culture. They just throw it out blindly and they refuse or deny people from actually um, embracing their culture. And I would like to explain more. I would like to link this back to an argument
Yo,
that I will later discuss. Sure.
Now, I think I have explained the difference between appreciation and appreciation, and and you mentioned how conservative people cannot learn because they are conservative in the first place. But I have mentioned that they can learn directly from anyone through appreciation, and it doesn't have to be done by appropriation by another group of white people, right?
Here, here.
Okay. Okay, first of all, let me tell you this. Here, what about people's way of knowing whether or not they're different? Some conservative people who don't like their culture to be spread out can just bring up the excuse of cultural appropriation because then people don't actually know what the difference is. So what's the point of bringing that up if people don't even know or if people are that ignorant to actually assume cultural appropriation? And I would like to move on to my arguments that one, due to the existence of the internet and globalization, cultural appropriation is inevitable. So why not just embrace it? Not only does it preserve culture by spreading more awareness about the culture, it provides people with the ability of expressing themselves and discovering new things. It is not wrong for an Indonesian person to like sushi because it's not cultural appropriation. However, because of how mischaracterized cultural appropriation is, people are quick to use this whenever they see something that they do not like or when they want to gatekeep their own culture, which I want to get to that point soon enough. Which is cultural appropriation is being used as a term or an excuse to express gatekeeping or accusing someone of stealing their culture. Cultural appropriation is itself is not exactly harmful. It in fact spreads more awareness and actually introduces the culture to the modern world. I will give you an example of how Pixar Studios treats different cultures, Coco and such as their movies Coco and Moana, which help introduce the culture to a broader audience. And this is why it is actually not harmful, but it can actually benefit them. And isn't gatekeeping culture itself a form of discrimination? This hinders racial and cultural relations. You know why? Because cultural appropriation would help more people integrate with each other because it puts a spotlight on different cultures and it shows the appeals and interests for each other's cultures while also providing different people with different opportunities to learn about each other's culture. The opposition side of the house has made a pretty I would say ignorant claim on how cultural appropriation is exclusive to white people. No, cultural appropriation is not just exclusive to white people. It is also often accused to it is basically used by the majority. So basically anywhere so basically that claim is pretty ignorant and culture and tradition it's not the same. What they have described is what they have described is the culture that they have described the cultural appropriation that they have described is in fact not cultural appropriation. That's blatantly racism. That is not how we characterize cultural appropriation. It is not wrong to like something, and you shouldn't be judged because you like a certain something that another person says that you can't like. In fact, that would be discrimination, and that would only hinder freedom of expression. And that is why we are proud to propose.
Thank you, Arvin, who spoke for 7 minutes and 28 seconds. Now, I invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Rachel. The stage is yours.
I'll start speaking in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, dear adjudicator, as well as fellow debaters. So regarding this debate's motion, which is that the government house welcomes cultural appropriation, us, the opposition house, claims it to be something that is ignorant as well as offensive. So first of all, the exclusivity of this case. So the government's main concern is cultural appreciation, which is something that they have mentioned beforehand from their first and second speaker, which the first speaker of my house has elaborated the difference between appreciation and appropriation. We have defined clearly how the government's way of appreciating these races, cultures, there are actually appropriation, in which I'd like to explain how the validity of appreciation is decided by the subject who is appreciated. Like whether or not you appreciate me is decided by myself. Therefore, the main stakeholder or the main actor here is the minority groups. So I'm gonna start with a couple of rebuttals. First of all, regarding those said minority groups, the government side characterizes mostly only the people who does the whitewashing or the cultural appropriation, and not the minority groups. They say they divide those people into open-minded people or progressive people and conservative people. They do not even mention about the minority groups or the vulnerable actors, as they call it. So the open-minded people, they said that our mechanism will only work on them, while the conservative people won't be able to appreciate the cultures with our mechanism. However, I'd like to state here that being conservative and ignorant is not a reason someone should be excused for not being able to respect a culture. Being conservative, it does not mean that, let's just make cultural appropriation appropriate because, it's beneficial for the conservative people. And they claim us to be ignorant. I mean, we here are discussing more about the vulnerable actors or the minorities, because the government side of the house dismisses the actual feelings and of offenses of the minority groups. Dear adjudicator and the government side, I'd like all of us to remember that when we are in a discussion with someone who is more affected by the topic of this discussion, it takes a larger emotional toll on them. So we cannot dictate what they feel. We can't dictate that, oh no, they're not going to be offended by this because this is this, when in fact, in reality, they are offended by that. And which brings me to my second rebuttal. They call our proposition as gatekeeping culture. No, we are not doing that. What we're doing is educating people to respect it and not treat it as something that is like just a costume or just a hairstyle. And I don't see how your proposition, how the government's proposition would build intercultural relations. I mean, how does tanning your skin darker or like having box braids, how does it makes us have intercultural relations with other people? So going on into my arguments, I have 3 arguments and 1 extension. So first of all, cultural appropriation is offensive to minority groups. So let's just call cultural appropriation out for what it is. Cultural plagiarism that is justified when done by members of majority groups. I would like to invite all of you to imagine, if you were an African American in the 1960s having dreadlocks or box braids, considering it was a time of extreme segregation, extreme oppression, women were raped, fetished, harmed because of their hair. They were oppressed because of their hair. Now, 60 years later, you find out that your oppressors, those same white people, they are celebrating their birthdays. They are using or wearing dreadlocks because for their own amusement, because it's fun, or like they are doing so when in your time you are harmed, you are hated because of it. It is offensive. So I mean, what is the urgency here for the government side? I mean, just dress up for Halloween as something else. Just pick out a different hairstyle. There is no necessary drive for the affirmative to go forth with this motion. And if they say that their motion supports cultural appreciation, which is their main goal, we believe that there are other ways in which you can show cultural appreciation without indulging in cultural appropriation. For example, I would feel much more appreciated and welcomed if people were genuinely interested and intrigued by my culture, and they show that genuine intrigue and interest by educating themselves about my culture, my history, and they can do so by finding out more about it. Or, for example, as my first speaker said, build social and emotional connections with those members of the minority groups. Welcoming cultural appropriation is harmful, as it would only be teaching generations to come that dressing up or putting on a certain physical garment, it would mean like understanding and accepting these people of the minorities when in fact they are offended by it. It would be teaching the majority groups that they in fact have power to take and to claim these cultures of the minority groups. My third point is that it being cultural appropriation, it enforces and highlights traditional stereotypes that are used to define races solely. For example, for Halloween, people would dress up as Indians by wearing a pashmina and using a red marker to mark their foreheads. This would be taking the issue of racism and stigmatization way more lightly than it should be taken, because in the regard of race and stigma, for example, someone in a minority group, he or she has the stigma that is built around her race for the rest of her life, while for the majority group, it is only one night or one week of a costume. And I'd like to say that culture is more than just a costume. And as the first speaker of my house had said, the examples of Hawaiians handing out flower necklaces or like taking photos in kimonos in Japan, this is different because of the existency of invitation from the people holding their culture. They are giving the invitation for them to indulge in it secara langsung. Thank you. I'm proud to oppose.
The Deputy Leader of Opposition spoke for 7 minutes and 20 seconds. Thank you, Rachel. Now I invite the government web to close this case. Please, Marco, the stage is yours.
Hello, am I audible? Wait for a sec. Let me just do this.
Yes, we can hear you.
Right now. Thank you. Hello. Conservative people. Ladies and gentlemen, before I start with this debate, I would like to say that, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that culture is great. The spread of culture is absolutely great, of course, amazing. However, on their side of the case, they only further strengthen these all stereotypes and bad things about the cultures. We instead solve the problem. On to my rebuttals first. Ladies and gentlemen, conservative people are introduced to other cultures not because they don't want, or not because it's because they don't have the privilege to. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the benefit, or we actually have the exclusive benefit of having more exposure to the culture in itself. Let's look at the reality. The reality is that there aren't a lot of immigrants in the very first place. There aren't a lot of cultural connections. There aren't a lot of cultural contact between these people. So how is someone supposed to appreciate a culture? How is someone supposed to care about the culture if they don't even know about the culture in the first place? And that is an exclusive benefit on our side of the case. Listen, gentlemen, conservative people are introduced to other culture. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a very elitist mindset to believe that everyone in the world can get the culture being introduced to them directly by the minority group. What if there isn't any minority group? What if they live extremely far away from that group? You can't just expect everyone to have the same amount of access to this culture as what you said. And it is, and because of that, it's a very idealistic way of thinking. And ladies and gentlemen, people don't know the difference between cultural appropriation and appreciation. It is a very vague distinction, and people use the term cultural appropriation even when someone is actually trying to appreciate the culture. How are we supposed to know if someone actually means it? This is a pretty flawed mechanism. And to add to the salt in the wound, they have said, while they say, hey, this might be offensive to the already minority groups. But ladies and gentlemen, please understand and please remember that everyone has, and that the word offensive, that being offended is different for everyone, even in the same minority group. And if cultural appropriation is outlawed, how are people going to be able to spread awareness towards said culture? How are people? You're going to be extremely restricted to almost everything. POI denied. And ladies and gentlemen, there's actually example, is proof of how cultural appropriation actually warms people up to certain cultures. For example, the examples of dreadlocks and how they are now appreciated. It's proof why cultural appropriation makes a cultural appreciation. Right. Onto my clashes. My first clash is about if cultural appropriation harms or benefits minority groups. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe both sides of the house believe that minority groups should be protected. However, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that cultural appropriation doesn't harm minority groups because because by inciting awareness, by exposing this culture to the other world, by letting this culture to be exposed to the other world, people understand that the ones behind the cultures should be respected for doing it, and therefore minority groups actually benefit from it. And listen, no cultural appropriation and if there was no cultural appropriation, it'll be very hard to actually appreciate the culture because it is now gate-kept from the outside world. It would simply die off. It would simply be forgotten by the time and will not have a legacy to protect because no one else is now here to spread the culture. You are only here to spread an extremely specific amount without having to offend anyone, which is already very hard enough. And ladies and gentlemen, my second clash if cultural appreciation in itself is better. We agree, ladies and gentlemen, that cultural appreciation is of course better than cultural appropriation. However, but still, when you spread a culture and when you see a culture being used in a way that is probably exploitation. However, what's so wrong about using it? If a Rihanna or if a singer uses a certain culture, you're not going to instantly hate Rihanna. You're not going to instantly hate the culture. Instead, people would be curious. People would see because people are exposed to that culture, and they say. When it inspires people to actually appreciate the culture because now that we have exposure to the culture. And you say that you only want cultural appreciation, but most of the time, let's look at the reality. Sometimes it's very hard to accept another culture in its absolute self. Sometimes you need to appropriate a culture in order for a demographic to actually have it, to actually enjoy it. But most of the time, cultural appreciation is actually triggered from an exposure, something that's only that is an exclusive benefit on our side of the house, because it's from cultural appropriation. Now, let's put both of our case in comparison. We have the exclusive benefit of having more exposure to the culture, because now that we can interpret it freely, people will know about it. It will get exposed to the world. People will search about it. People will learn about it, because only in our case, people actually know that this culture exists, and we have less discrimination, because again, in accordance to our class, these people are now in the spotlight. We show that these people can do things. We show about their cultures. We show about the people. And not only do we end discrimination, we also end those stereotypes, and that is why we should win this debate. My second case comparison is that they actually have the exclusive harm of having your rights to express yourself in any way extremely constrained. Why can't you change it? Why can't you appropriate it in order to fit, in order to have a broader audience enjoy said culture? These minorities shouldn't be offended, because you say that we don't have any context. However, in their side of the house, they have perverted the context in which the cultural appropriation actually happened. Is because cultural appropriation needs to happen so that everyone can enjoy it, so that other people can enjoy it. And stereotypes actually happen more on your side of the house, and because less people know and are aware of the culture, and now people only base their opinions, people only base their knowledge, people only base their thoughts on a certain culture based on those stereotypes, because now they know less because of the less exposure and the less amount of people appreciating that culture in your side of the house.
Thank you, Marco, who spoke for 7 minutes and 30 seconds. Now, I invite the opposition whip, Karen, to summarize your case. Ready when you are.
Hold on. Okay, so to start off my speech, I want to do a few rebuttals government side of the house. So first of all, as you can see, educator, they are misdefining what appropriation is, because even before the debate, we have known already that appropriation is adopting something unacknowledgedly and inappropriately, and that is something they keep on forgetting. Yes, they may have given a definition of appropriation, something as welcoming, embracing, and supporting, but they have yet to remember that this is also meaning that we are adopting the culture inappropriately and unacknowledgedly. So this is controversial to some of their arguments, because first of all, they are saying that appropriation can spread more awareness to the culture, to the conservative people and all that stuff. But we are saying that this can be done in another way, because we have given an example of, for example, when someone is wearing when someone that is not from the culture wearing like their other people's traditions and cultures, this can be perceived as something different from the other people that saw it, and this is a risk that they have not even tried to give a solution to. How if a person sees someone, for example, someone using a headscarf or something, and they don't understand it, and they don't even know what the meaning of it, and then they, because of the dominant people, they try to follow the person itself, and then the meaning of the culture become lost, and the person with the culture can become offended because they see that their culture is being played by the society itself. And this is something that they are disregarding about the feelings of the person with the culture itself. And also, they are saying that this can spread awareness, but how can it spread awareness if at first you are adopting it unacknowledgedly and inappropriately? And they are implementing that we are making people unable to like something or to like a certain culture, but that is entirely wrong. We are saying that people can like a culture, people can learn a culture, but not by appropriating. And because appropriating can cause so much risk, like we have already explained from our first and second speaker, where the risk can be offensive to the culture itself or the people with the culture itself, when where we still encourage the people to learn and to like the culture by, for example, educating themselves, or in some cases they can actually learn from the person with the culture itself. And they have also mentioned that this is not exclusive because access is limited um, to the minority. But have already said that this self-education can be done through searching online or searching Google. And is online limited to everyone? Is online limited to conservative people? No, internet can be accessed by anyone with even if they are conservative or even not conservative. So their argument cannot stand. And also, what we are saying, that our proposal in this is way better than their proposal of culture appropriating. Why? Because in our side of the house, we can still learn the culture, we can still accept the culture without having a risk of offensing people with the culture itself. When we already explained that offense can be perceived as something that makes the person offended and doesn't have to cause harm. And the offension that is done here is enough to be considered as an act of disrespect. And this is something that still can happen in their side of the house, and they have not even given a solution to. And also, I want to compare cases. So their worst case is people can misuse this culture because people can perceive it differently, and this can give offense to a lot of people and a lot of culture, and it ends up a lot of people will not understand the culture itself and misinterpret the culture itself. Well, if our worst case is okay, yes, the conservative people may not learn as much as in their side, but this is still unlikely to happen because like we said, we are still focusing on the education and self-educating and learning about the culture itself from the people, or through access in social media and all that stuff. And their best case is that conservative people can be open-minded to the culture, but as you can see, educated, there is still a chance that they might not understand it because they adopt it unacknowledgedly and inappropriately, and can still take offense to people around them. While our side of the house, we have given the best case and solution, because people can understand the culture by self-educating and by the community itself without disrespecting the culture itself. And this is something that we offer that is better than the government side of the house. And also, the thing that we are actually questioning is, how does one learn about a culture by being exposed to a person dressing up or appearing physically as those minority groups? That is something very unlikely to happen. Something that has a possibility of failing in a bigger chance, because by you only seeing someone appearing as someone or dressing up as someone, it doesn't make people that perceive it learn something from it. And also, that second speaker has already elaborated how minority groups are offended by this culture appropriation, and this is something that is disregarded always by the government side, where they only think about the culture itself, then where people can learn about all the culture, but don't think about the person that has the people who has the culture itself. And this cannot happen in this motion, because because the biggest stakeholder in this debate is, of course, the people with the culture itself, and why they are, and by they are regarding the stakeholder itself. This shows that their argument cannot stand, and we should win this debate.
Okay, thank you, Ken, who spoke for 7 minutes and 31 seconds. Now, to close the case, I invite the opposition whip, Felicia. The stage is yours. Sorry, I meant the opposition reply.
Dear adjudicator, to wrap up this debate, I would like to talk about the exclusivity in our side of the House. Now, our side of the House have talked about how has provided a solution that preserves the culture to its true context. Now, because we have also mentioned how people who don't own the culture is not allowed to use the culture in the wrong context in for the preservation of the culture to its context, because with not going with this motion, we believe that hindering the rise of stereotypical racism is very important, because from their side of the House, they have talked about how cultural appropriation can lower down racism. But we have mentioned how the influence of cultural appropriation, caused by dominant groups can create harm in terms of putting it in the wrong context and making other dominant races think that it's okay, and they can actually adopt our culture with ease. Now, our side of the House has mentioned that everyone has a difference in interpretation. Not everyone will view this as a positive thing, because other cultures may see this as a mockery, since culture in implementation is indeed exclusive to the owner of its culture. Throughout in this debate, the government has been very dismissive towards the effects of their proposal towards the minority groups, which is in this debate the vulnerable actors here. They have actually dismissed the fact how cultural appropriation can affect the minority groups by offending them, even with or without realizing. Now, their worst case is that no conservative groups will be able to understand. But our side of the House again has also mentioned that these conservative groups, it wouldn't be called a cultural integration if these conservative groups just learn about culture from dominant groups that are progressive, because in the end of the day, we never know whether the minority groups, what the minority groups feels about this, and there will be no integration between the majority group, the dominant group, and the minority group. Instead, it will just be pure integration between the dominant groups, just between the progressive and the conservatives, meaning that our goal would never be our goal wouldn't pass through. Now, I also want to talk about how the opposition side of the House has been confused between the difference between appreciation and appropriation, and they get lost in the translation. And they have presented this mechanism where the alternative to where cultural appreciation and appropriation is as if they portrayed it as if these things are the same. But our side of the House have talked about how cultural appreciation can be gained through education that can be accessed everywhere in social media, through communities and social media, and it is very broad, Your Honor. And we have talked about how we want these conservative groups and dominant groups to pursue in the connection between majority groups and minor groups. And this is how you, of course, want to be appreciated as a minor. You want these major groups to be able to contact you and to be able to approach you, instead of them just discussing about your culture in their only in their from their side of the society. And what we want and what our goal is from our side of the house is to make people aware of the difference between appreciation and appropriation. And our side of the house has won this case because we have given both solution and a clear urgency as to why cultural appropriation should not be welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresia, who spoke for 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Now, as the government reply, I invite Arvin. The stage is yours.
3, 2, 1. Okay, to conclude this debate from the government side of the House's perspective, I would like to give my reply speech. First of all, I would like to give an analogy. Let's say I am a white person who enjoys Japanese food, but unfortunately I don't actually know Japanese. By their definition, that would be cultural appropriation. However, it is actually appreciating culture. Now, this is where we think that the opposition side of the House has failed, because they have failed to realize that in PC culture, political correctness culture, cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation has no line to divide it. Cultural appropriation is being used as a term to gatekeep culture. Even if someone was trying to pay homage or directly respect the culture, it would still be called cultural appropriation because there is no actual line that they have actually described to us. They just stated that cultural appreciation is respecting a culture. They haven't actually given us a proper explanation on what differentiates these two. Because then, let's say I respect a certain culture and I want to express and share other people the new culture I found. I would still be called cultural appropriation because then the people still think that cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation is the same thing. And the opposition side of the House's claims about minorities' reactions are all based off of assumptions. They only assume that people would outrage over this when this is not necessarily going to happen. An example that I can give you, in fact, lies a few months ago when an artist named Adele posted a photo on her social media page with her hair in dreadlocks and Jamaican themed clothing. The people in fact respected Adele, and the people associated with the culture, the Jamaican people, actually encouraged her to speak up more about the culture because then they are being given more representation. They are being given more awareness over a culture. And that is how you preserve culture. By having more people aware of your culture, you will effectively stop a culture from dying. And this is what the opposition side of the House has failed to respond upon. Also, their claim that their numerous claims of stereotyping only happens because a certain trait or a certain culture is exclusive to a certain amount of people or a certain society. This only happens because then other people are not allowed to actually use this culture. That's why stereotypes happen, because you usually associate them with a certain society of people or community of people. By doing cultural integration, we would actually be removing the stigma or the stereotype that is exclusive to a certain amount of people and actually remove that stereotype because now it is being universally accepted. Also, cultural appropriation or integration of culture is actually going to help bring more people together, because then if people just express their appreciation over someone who respects their culture, it puts a spotlight on different cultures and how people are eager to learn about each other. It gains more appeal, more awareness for the culture. It doesn't have that gatekeeping or isolating a culture or strictly guarding a culture so that it can't be implemented by someone else, which of course leads to stereotypes. And this is why we think that the opposition side of the House has lost this debate and our side of the House has actually won this debate, because they have failed to respond upon those points. And that is why we are proud to propose this motion.
Okay, thank you, Arvin. Now, thank you everybody who has participated in this wonderful debate. The results will be announced in the closing ceremony next Saturday. Participants and adjudicators may now leave the room.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the debate, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for the debate, guys.
Wait, I want to ask. Ini jadi pengumumannya next Saturday.
In the closing ceremony.
When? Next Saturday?
Next Saturday, there will be a closing ceremony for CC Cup. Then it will be the announcement for who's third place, who's winner.
Okay.
Sorry for the long wait.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, see you guys. Okay,
Thank you.
also, yeah, special thanks to our sponsors. Mama Suka, Menambang Muara Enim, Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi, Bank Jasa Jakarta, BCA, PT Biomedika Mandiri Jaya, PT Trust Sparta, Rohto, and all the other sponsors for supporting CC Cup 2020. That is all for this.
Langsung dihap bisa, sup sampai kimbap juga bisa. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Pertama coba nggak kuat, makin lama makin nikmat. Mama selalu tahu yang enak. Dari masak-masak sampai makan-makan, Mama selalu tahu yang enak.
Asuransi Cakrawala Proteksi dengan Resya bisa dibantu?
Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh. Mata kering, jadi fresh.
So fresh.
Rohto Dry Fresh.